want to transition over to Conor on this. You know, where it's Conor madness. Everybody's got Conor's name in his mouth. Anderson Silva came out with, and I didn't know this. You know, I've been licking my wounds for a couple days. He's actually the underdog in the Brunson fight. And Anderson's come out and said, hey, you know, before I retire, I want to fight Conor. You know, and Conor's said, you know, fook 'em all. You know, I'll fight anybody as long as the numbers are right, get the numbers right. Man, Conor, listen, they already took both your belts away, whether you believe it or not. Okay. You're woofing about Floyd Mayweather. Hey, daddy, that fight's not going to happen. So the longer you're out there, brother, the less people are going to, if you think you're irreplaceable, you're not, man. You're not.
Yeah, so you finished that in a different way than I thought you would. I thought you were going to stay on Conor and Anderson. Now, I'll go a step further for you. Did you know Anderson, he wants to do it at 170. He's willing to go down to 170. And he did a weight cut and got down to like 176 or something, or 174. Now, I don't believe him that he actually did that. There would be no sense to pass up the weight that he's got to make against Brunson. That wouldn't make any kind of sense, but this is the claim that he's making. And I'll tell you this, if Anderson wants that fight and is willing to get to 170, he's going to get that fight. I'll also remind you of one other thing. Anderson's last fight, Anderson used to fight at 170. People don't know that. Anderson's last fight before he got into the UFC was at 175. He was in a tournament with Okami and Shields. I think Carlos Condit might have been in that. I have to look up the tournament. But the bottom line was that was his competition prior to the UFC, and the weight that he made was 175. When he came to the UFC, he got signed for 180. They didn't need a 170-pound star. They had Matt Hughes at the time. Koscheck was an up-and-comer. Fitch was starting to make his splash. So they signed him at 185, but people do forget that. Anderson could get to 170, is willing to get to 170, and so many people, when Anderson had made that comment, overlooked it, thought he was kidding, thought he wasn't being serious. I'm on the other side of it. I think he's very serious. I think he would get to 170, and Conor would certainly take that fight. And that would do big numbers regardless of the outcome of the Brunson fight. And if Anderson's at the end of his lease, he may be. He may be towards the end of his road. I mean, let's see what happens here. But I'll make this point to you. That's still a marketable and drawable fight, even if a guy's on his way out. Because it's like, okay, great, then we're going to hand the torch to Conor fully. And there's something to sell there. And Conor never commented on it. I think Conor also was of the school of, oh, well, that isn't going to happen, and everybody's trying to use my name. I think Anderson was being quite serious when he said it. Claimed that he had made a weight cut, which I don't believe, but you get the point. And whether he did or not, that is his real weight. He's about a 180-pounder. That weight class just doesn't exist, so he had to choose where he went, and he ended up all the way at 205. He had a little help, as USADA eventually showed us, but he could go 170. He's very, very lean.
You know, there was a time, you know, Randy and Dana, they've been at war, the pissing match the last several years. But there was a time where Dana said, listen, I've never said no to that guy. I've never said no to Randy. Want to fight for the title, want to do this, want to do that, and Randy deserved that. I believe that if Anderson tells Dana that he wants to do something, I think Dana offers him that same kind of respect as well. I'd love to see it. I do, you know, I do mention to Conor, hey man, you're the biggest thing since sliced bread, but somebody's making new bread every day. So, you know, don't keep the star from to continue to rise because you've lost your goddamn mind. You're not fighting Floyd Mayweather. Let's come back to the cage and make some money.
Now, aren't you out of bounds on that? I mean, I feel like maybe you're marking out a little bit. Here's what I'm hearing about Conor, and Conor plays everything right in the media. I see so many people that try to critique him, and you're right. He could easily stub his toe. However, I will offer you this. What I hear behind the scenes is that he's very easy to deal with. If you want to get a deal done and you want to get a fight or a contract, that he's very easy to deal with. That he comes out and says, I demanded this and I got it. And I got $10 million or $20 million or whatever some of his claims are. But that behind the scenes, he's not. What I do hear is that he's a man of his word. Now, everybody changes eventually. Everybody pushes back and has their hard moments. And I don't propose that he isn't a guy that understands his worth and goes out there and tries to get it a little bit. But as long as Joel, here's something that you need to consider, so does everybody else. As long as Conor is easy to deal with in the office, he can go out and do whatever craziness he wants to do in the media. And I feel like you're saying, like, hey, Conor's not going to fight. Conor was pretty straight up. I thought after the Eddie fight, he said, look, my girlfriend's pregnant. I'm taking my oars out of the water a little bit until the baby comes. And for whatever reason that he needed to be there while she's pregnant. But he did tell everybody. He did disclose it. They did the interim championship, or getting ready to. Everybody kind of knew the score. He's not a guy that's gone back on his word. Some people didn't like his words. Some people didn't want him to take a break because he is the star and face of the company and champion 2 different divisions. Some people didn't like that. But as long as he's a man of his word and he does disclose ahead of time what his intentions are, I don't see any problem there. Now, if he starts to push back and huff and puff, it is a part of his youth. You know, some guys weren't around when Andrei Arlovsky was created, and it's the finest example, and it's really the only one you need to know about the business. The business at that time ran off of 2 people. Now, I'm going back to 2005, but it ran off of 2 people, Randy Couture and Tito Ortiz. Now, Chuck Liddell was around, but for whatever reason, Chuck was not a star. Chuck's star was one of the slowest to rise ever. Once it finally did, he's one of the biggest stars ever. But it was a very, very slow rise, and nobody could figure out why Chuck wouldn't get over. I can remember the time when him having a mohawk was weird. It was really weird. I also remember the time when kids started putting their hair in mohawk on Halloween and going as Chuck Liddell. Eventually it became a cool thing. Conor went through that same thing more recently. I remember a time when he would show up on set when I was out at UFC Tonight in a tuxedo all the way down to the bow tie, and it was weird. Now it's a really cool and fashionable look that designers are getting behind and wanting to be the one to make his next suit for him. So the point that I'm trying to make, though, when Randy Couture retired and Tito Ortiz got in his pissing match and stepped aside, they were left with nobody. They had absolutely no stars, and they created one overnight called Andrei Arlovsky. And Andrei Arlovsky became recognized and believed all the way down to reporters that are supposed to know what they're doing. He was believed to be the scariest guy on the planet. Now, if you looked a little bit closer, he had a record of 8 wins and 4 losses and had been TKO'd 2 fights before on an undercard. They had nobody else. They took one look at this guy and they go, this is the guy with the youth and the look that is made for a billboard. And they created him overnight, and his skills were not great. But he had the look and he had the marketing machine behind him. And the next thing you knew, not only was he ranked number 1, but he was also selling out arenas. The point that I'm trying to make, and Conor might be too young to know this, and he might find out the hard way, because Conor's, 27 now, and this is 13 years ago, so he's 14 years old. So Conor may not know this story. They created something out of nothing overnight. Literally, Joel, it took them just over a week to do it. They put him on everything. They put his face out there. They pushed him to the top of the bill. They got the media behind it. They had his press conferences. They put him in a suit. They branded him the pit bull. They gave him a mouthpiece with fangs on him. They did the whole bit. Got him that strap. Picked his opponents. I was there. I debuted the night when he headlined and fought Paul Buntello for the World Championship. Now, that isn't meant to insult Paul, but the reality is there is no time in fighting where Paul Buntello was a true number 1 contender, but there are ways to do it. It's happened before. Tito was soon forgotten. Tito, who was the biggest star at the time, could not get an appearance at the local county fair, and the same thing can happen with Conor. And you'll think that it can't, but it can. And it can happen overnight. If he wants to puff, and he puffs a little bit too hard. Now, again, this comes to the office, not to the way he portrays the meetings in the media. But if in the office he becomes too hard to deal with and they can't get something done, it's going to be game over, and it's going to be game over in record time. And that's what he doesn't understand. He thinks he's going to come on shows like this or go on SportsCenter and tell his side. He will not. When we all get the email that says that he's out and this is who's in, that's who we are then going to talk to.
You make a fair point, and I don't try to be anybody I'm not up here. I'm a maniac. I get that. But I've had a very unique perspective of this sport. I watched it grow from the back of my car dealership. I watched superstars like you and Randy and Danny and Ed Herman and Nate Quarry and Chris Lieben, and it goes on and on and on. come out of there, and I've watched this sport. A lot of people that are in this sport, you know, I go to your practices, and I see the conversations that these up and comers are having, and I'm like, wow, that whole conversation wasn't even possible to happen before. And my point is there's people that help pave the way for everybody. And even though it's only been, 16 years, man, without a lot of those key ingredients, no matter how good the promotion machine is, it wouldn't have went anywhere. I mean, you can't forget about Matt Hughes and Randy Couture and Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz. You just can't. Those are the four horsemen out of the gate. Now, another guy, to me, is Anderson Silva. You know, if somebody says who the fuck is Anderson Silva, as a fan, now maybe I'm marking out, that irritates me. You know, as a fan, that irritates me. And again, I'm marking out, but that did kind of ruffle my feathers, because I'm like, I see it now. Everybody thinks this sport has always been this way, and goddamn, it hasn't. You know, you look at, we started the show with Ryan, and I'll circle back to that. Everybody had a full-time job 16 years ago. Everybody had a full-time job. One of the great things to get to was when you made enough money fighting that you could quit your job. And now people with no fights ever are they don't even have a job. You know, Ryan Walker's got a full-time job. You know, that makes me feel good. Yeah, kid, but again, I've had a unique perspective on this sport, and I understand the history of it, and I don't think everybody does.
Yeah, and that is a little bit tough when you take guys like you and I that were there as the table was being set before everybody was sitting down at it, is what you just said. The sacrifices were much more, and it really was about who wants to do this, not who can be bribed into it. And you will hear guys come out, and I support it from a marketing standpoint. I support the guys that come out and say, you know, this business only exists because of me, and I did it, and I did all of that. Where the problem is the guys that believe it. Where Conor thinks that he has changed the game or done anything like that. And sometimes, hey, are we marks and we're falling for what he's saying? Or does he actually believe this? Did he change the sport? No. Did he create the sport? No. Was the sport long before him, very successful, and will be here and very successful after him? Yeah, of course. I mean, don't forget, Conor's not in Bellator. Bellator's thriving. Go check the stock prices over at Viacom. When they started, when Coker signed on, and Viacom's a whole company, but I'm just using this as an example. They were worth $5.1 billion. Do you know what Viacom's worth today, Joel? After Coker came on? I get that this isn't, the Bellator's just one part. I'm not trying to give my boss all of the credit, but this is an example because it's the dates that I checked. They were worth $5.1 billion when Coker signed on. Do you know what their stock price is today?
I do not.
They're sitting on $15.3 billion.
Ooh.
So I guess the point that I'm making, Conor's incredible for business. Conor's done an incredible job. We don't have Conor. We're kicking ass. So if you think for a second that the UFC without Conor isn't still going to kick it, that's just silly. We're an example over at Bellator that you don't have to have Conor to be selling out arenas and moving the needle. There's great things that go on out there. And to your initial point, when you're a guy like Conor that came in late and the table is already set and there's all sorts of money in MMA and there's sponsors and there's videos, games and there's magazines and there's arenas and there's a show every week. There's podcasts. Sometimes you do miss the point. And if he marks out for his own gimmick, and we've seen guys do this in every industry, if he marks out for his own gimmick and he starts behaving the way that he's saying he's behaving, and that will happen over time. If he says something enough times, he's just going to become that person. He's going to find out the same way as Andrei Arlovski did, because when they created Andrei Arlovski, Andrei eventually started to believe it too. And they started paying him more and more and trying to keep him around and going, okay, this is a team effort here. But eventually Andrei puffed too hard, and all of a sudden he wasn't fighting Paul Bunatellos anymore. All of a sudden he's locked in that cage with guys like Tim Sylvia.